Now, the new cabinet of South Africa's 7th administration is expected to hold the first cabinet lekgotla next week, Thursday and Friday. President Ramaphosa has this time appointed ministers from various political parties that are part of the Government of National Unity. Joining us to also weigh on the new administration is anti-apartheid activist and chairperson of the Archbishop Tutu Intellectual Property Trust, Dr Mamphela Ramphele. Dr Ramphele, thank you so much for joining us this evening on News at Prime. I guess it's been, quite a tumultuous couple of weeks if we start there, because I read your opinion piece as well. But what do you make also of this formation of the 7th administration and everything that it took to get here as well? I mean, we saw some of those public spats as well between political leaders, but here we are now, we've got our cabinet that has been sworn in.
Good evening, and good evening to your listeners, and thank you for inviting me to have this conversation. I believe that our country is being ushered into the maturation process. We have spent 30 years patting ourselves on the back, despite many glaring failures. This election represents a shift, a major shift, because the ANC, especially through its president, Mamphela Ramphele, was still saying, we're going to win an outright majority. The people are tired of being taken for granted. Gone are the days when people vote because this is Mandela's party. Gone are the days when young people believe that their votes don't count. I'm pleased to see that a lot more young people participated, but I'm still sad to realize that the level of participation is not what it should be. The responsibility of each and every one of us, including this 7th administration, is to ensure that every South African citizen, particularly those under 50 years old, who own the future that we are talking about, must be empowered, enabled, and encouraged to express their choices.
Yeah. And Dr. Ramphele, you also write about, this low voter turnout. I mean, it was just under 60% in your recent opinion piece. And when you write about the political space that we find ourselves in now, giving some of those reasons as to why the ANC performed so poorly that have been ventilated quite a bit in the public discourse as well. But you also say that the ANC's poor showing tells an incomplete story. And to understand these elections, we need to dig deeper. If you please can expand on this.
We are a continent that is unlike any other, where the gap between the average age of the leader in Africa is about 65. The average average African citizen is 19. Ask yourself the question, how can an aged leadership understand and listen to, with respect, the views of this youthful population? And that is not happening. You look at what's happening in Kenya. Ruto decided, having flown on a private jet to the US in an indebted country, comes back to impose additional taxes. And young people, their mothers and fathers and uncles were still saying, oh gosh, what are we going to do? They just mobilized in a matter of hours. And we're on the streets, in parliament, and watch this. They found a man abandoned by his peers on a wheelchair inside the parliamentary chamber. They didn't attack him. They carried him. These are young people who are not hooligans. These are young people who care about the future. But our leaders are not listening. Here in South Africa, we have many instruments of youth leadership which have been politicized. The National Youth Development platform is not open to anybody. It's only ANC young people who benefit from that. So we are being called by young people to reimagine what public representation means. And these young people would have been even more vocal in South Africa and much earlier had we instituted, like any self-respecting democracy, civic education in our school system. The curriculum that we have has life orientation. What better life orientation is there than to enable young people to understand what does it mean to be a citizen of South Africa? What are my rights? What are my responsibilities? How do I exercise that? How do I behave in accordance with the values of our Constitution? All young people hear about the Constitution is how it is a Western this, it is overreaching. We are not talking to the values, the value system of Ubuntu, which is embedded in our Constitution. So I am pleased to see that even though the voter turnout was low, there are enough young people now interested. And I'm urging my peers, the 60, 70-year-olds who are the real Madalas and Makulus, to open the space for young people to get the benefits of the struggles that so many gave their lives for. We can become a democracy that is an exemplar in the world only if we move away from me, myself, and I of competitive political parties to the people governing, the people being governed in the interest of the people. And those people are not only those who are alive today, but those yet to be born.
Yeah, and you speak quite a bit, and rightfully so, about the youth and the role of the youth when it comes to politics as well. One may think of roads must fall and fees must fall just here at home, and of course the examples that you made with the youth in Kenya and what they've done there too, and their successes there. Do you think when you're looking at the 7th administration and its composition that there's enough representation of youth in it?
Well, there is better representation, but not enough. In my view, the issue is not only youth, it is broader inclusiveness. How many women are there in key positions? Not as deputy ministers, but as ministers. How many young people are there who are ministers, not deputies? It's still not balanced. And I believe that what is missing is going back to the drawing board. What the ANC has done is using this rhetoric of a government of national unity to retain enormous power, 21 cabinet posts versus the rest, whereas they got only 40% of the votes. But also look at how bloated this cabinet is, or this executive in the broader sense, but also the cabinet. Now, my concern is that the president has not pronounced on the compromise because he says he couldn't have fewer people. Yes, we understand the politics of that. But what about simply say we will have this expanded executive committee, but we will reduce the benefits because we are still operating on the basis of the apartheid ministerial workbook. There is no reason why our cabinet ministers cannot be driven around in Q2s like I drive around. There's no reason why they need blue light boys. As Mandela used to say, who are you protecting me against? My own people that I'm representing, I'm serving? Why do they need to have these kind of conspicuous consumption of elitism in big Mercedes Benz and these horrible, ill-behaved security people like Mashatile's people who have still not been brought to book?
Dr. Ramphele, earlier, you said something quite interesting about the benefits of the struggle, of how many people died for us to be able to live the way we do now. When you think back to your days when you were one of the founding members of the Black Consciousness movement, and you fast forward to where we are now with this democratic republic, with the 7th administration, would you say that this is what you envisioned?
Absolutely not. You know, we were the first generation university graduates from many of our families. None of us understood that that gave us a license to have the biggest car, the biggest house, the biggest salary. We worked with the poorest communities in ways that put the emphasis on what better service do we produce? Because for us, freedom, true liberation meant that the personal, the professional, and the political were governed by the same value system. If I want to be free, as we did in the 70s and 80s, I should therefore wish that through my professional engagement, I am helping to catalyze the liberation of everybody with whom I got into contact. All of my patients that I met, and they will come and say, my name is Priti. I say, no. Your grandmother gave you a name, and therefore we need that name here so your grandmother can be part of the healing process. So the very process of being a doctor was a process of transformation. And of course, the political choices I had to make on a day-to-day basis, when I was sent here, there, I kept on saying, I will remain a freedom fighter until freedom is achieved, whatever the cost. And the cost was heavy. But I am also here feeling I represent a generation of peers, many of whom paid the ultimate sacrifice. I'm fortunate to be one of the few who have lived to see the freedom we fought for. And therefore, I will fight for the realization of this freedom until I go and meet my maker or this freedom materializes.
Many people have also brought concern, as you have, about this ostentatious lifestyle, the luxury as well. This week, when there was a swearing in here on Newzroom Afrika, we had one of our reporters, Junior Khumalo, who was at the BMW dealership that could be getting new cars for ministers as well. And I mean, they were expensive cars, also to bulletproof them as well was just under 5 million rand. And when you speak of the kind of leadership that you come from, that era, and you see where we are right now, where did it all go wrong? And is this where you're saying you're hoping for compassionate politics to be promoted?
Where it went wrong is when we moved away from liberation politics of my generation. Remember, we came into a South Africa that was paralyzed by fear in the late 60s. And we didn't revive the anti-apartheid struggle. We engendered a new struggle, a struggle for total liberation. And we said that liberation starts with you. If you are not free, and at that time, we called ourselves and we called non-whites, non-Europeans. The Mandelas and the Sisulus and the Tambos all were part of the acquiescence to being called this. We were the first generation to say no. We cannot win our freedom by labeling ourselves as the negatives of the very people who are oppressing us. So we shared our so-called Christian names and went back to our traditional names. But not just the names, the values. And it's from those values that I'm not permitted to be in a position where I am boasting of being the best dressed person in terms of wearing the Gucci's and the whatever the Italian whatever it is brands are. I believe that what we learned is that our traditional heritage had such elegance. I mean, I dress elegantly at very little expense because I've gone back to my grandmother's way of being elegant. Not because I've bought the most expensive, but because I've gone back to my roots. Imagine if we were to do that, not just in the dress, but also in the way we live and in the cars we drive. Why should we enrich the Germans who are using us as an assembly point for Mercedes-Benz, for BMW? We only assemble these motor cars. They are made in Germany because they want to keep the IP there. Sivukanin, when are we going to open our eyes to the fact that for us to be free, we've got to be in charge of the values we want to set for our nation? Not what the apartheid government's values are in the ministerial workbook, but in what does it feel like to live and to come from people who still remain in poverty. My village is poorer than it was when I grew up because this ANC government from 1994 completely neglected the rural areas because they're busy with the razzmatazz and the blue light boys in the urban areas. Yeah. Rural areas are completely neglected. Imagine this, if we were to support the talent that is there. We are a country with the youngest population profile. Imagine if each one of those young people got the best education, the best healthcare, the best nutrition. And we have the money to do it. Not on BMWs, but on investing in people.
Dr. Ramphele, thank you so much for your time this evening and also your contribution at large. And I must add, yes, you are dressed beautifully indeed. That was, of course, Dr. Mamphela Ramphele, who is an anti-apartheid activist.